Hi, my name's Travis Merrill, and I teach viola at San Diego State University. Today, I want to talk to you about string crossings. Why string crossings? Well, in my view, being able to sing through your instrument and create a long, seamless lyrical line is one of the primary goals of playing the viola. And in order for us to create a seamless line, we need to make sure that all of our seams are well hidden. And for us on a string instrument, string crossings are one of those major seams. So what I've done today is I've boiled down smooth string crossings into 4 basic principles. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through those principles. I'm going to give you some musical examples of where they apply, and also give you some very simple and straightforward exercises from people like Simon Fisher, from Dunas, that are going to help us learn how to do these things in the least amount of time possible. Our first principle for smooth string crossings, and a precondition for all of the other principles, is to make sure that we have a clear idea, a clear physical sense of the level of each string and also each string pair. Now it's a little bit more complicated than it sounds, because if you think about it, if I put my bow on the C string, I can have my bow on the C string really close to the bout, or really close to the G string, or somewhere in between, and that's all the level of the C string. So what I like to do to explore this is to actually just roll on each string silently and explore that level. So I'm figuring out, okay, this is how far I can go before I run into another string. As I'm doing that, one thing I'm checking for is to ensure that my bow stick and my upper arm are roughly level, and that I have a pretty straight line from my knuckle in my middle finger, my first knuckle, all the way to the elbow. I don't want to have any bends in my wrist. That's going to help, that's going to get in the way of distributing weight and power. And having that straight line, roughly straight line or level between the upper arm and the bow stick, that's going to allow me to rest the weight of my arm on that particular level. And that's really powerful, because the weight that we get from our arm, our upper arm in particular, it's the heaviest part of our arm, is really critical in making a beautiful sound effortlessly. If I'm resting that weight on the level, it's a lot easier for me to get a big sound. And if my arm is too low, you get the T-Rex arms. Or if I'm too high, I'm going to end up pressing a lot with my fingers. So somewhere in the middle, where I've got my upper arm roughly parallel to the bow stick, is going to help. I really like Carol Rodland's imagery here of imagining that your weight, the weight of your arm is resting on floating pillows. So I have a pillow kind of underneath my forearm and underneath my upper arm, and that's helping to support the weight and to make it feel effortless to move around the instrument. That also helps me to avoid tensing my shoulder, which is also a killer when it comes to releasing weight into the string. So I'm just going to go silently on each string in different parts of the bow, exploring those levels. And you'll notice it feels very different in the frog than it does at the tip. But again, I'm just exploring how far I can go without hitting another string. I'll do that for each string. I'll also do that for the double stops. Now, double stops are a really great way to practice this particular awareness, because there's a lot less play when you think about it in terms of how far you can move your arm. If I want to be on the C and the G string, there's not a lot of range of motion that I can do before I end up only being on just one string. So practicing the double stop levels a lot the same way, and figuring out where those levels are in your arm, is important. Doing these things with your eyes closed is a great way to develop that awareness. So for example, if I just go in the middle and I'm going to go C and G, then G to D, and then back. Or if I just go on a single string, that's a great way to develop your physical awareness of the string level. This is really critical when it comes, on the one hand, to placing the bow onto the string without looking at it, or also just playing, because most of the time we're not staring at our bow when we're playing. So practice that. That's really a critical component of the rest of these principles, is to have a really clear idea of where all of those levels are in space. Principle number 2, for smooth string crossings, always gradually move to the next string level. This is something the great cellist János Starko called anticipation. So to start off, let's demonstrate what happens if I don't anticipate my next string level. Say I'm playing just a simple little scale. If I don't anticipate my next string level, then what's going to happen is the crossing on the one hand is going to be larger than it needs to be, and it's also going to be later and faster than it needs to be. So to avoid that, on the one hand, I want to make sure I'm always gradually heading to the next string level. I want my upper arm to lead that motion. And the reason I want the upper arm to lead that motion, as we talked about, it's really the primary driver of weight. And so we want to feel that weight gradually moving to the next string to support our sound as we're playing. Now, Simon Fisher has a really great little exercise for this. He calls it pivoting. And what I'm going to do is set my metronome here to 60. I'm going to force myself to play a double stop between the C string and the G string, which is going to ensure that I'm heading to the next string in advance of when I need to be there, and then I'm gradually going to make the short note or the double stop shorter and shorter. It sounds like this. So you can hear by the end, I started with an 8th note double stop, then a 16th. By the time I got to a 32nd, you barely heard any crossing at all, but the crossing was very smooth because I was gradually heading to the next string level. Another way that you can practice this is with a simple exercise that Primrose discusses in his book Playing the Viola that he learned from Dunas. I'm going to play the whole exercise up and down, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So in this exercise, we're rocking back and forth between those two strings. I'm having to gradually head from one string to the next. I'm really thinking about my upper arm gradually moving to the next string, and I'm trying to hear almost a blending between my 4th finger and the open string, so that under my ear it almost sounds like I'm playing the same note the entire time, like the two pitches or the two sounds are blending together into one, as if I was playing a double stop. Now, Primrose liked to practice this to the extremes. In addition to playing 1 click per 8th note, he also liked to do 2, 3, 4, 6, all the way up to 8. So if you're feeling ambitious and want to do a 64 beat bow, by all means, give that one a shot. Principle number 3, when crossing rapidly back and forth between a pair of strings, set your upper arm on the double stop level for that pair of strings, and then use your forearm and your wrist to cross back and forth. So this is the sort of thing that happens all the time in classical music where we're playing, say, in a string quartet or a symphony, this kind of Alberti bass line. Something like that. And so what I want to do in that case is set my arm on the level between the two strings. So my upper arm is on the level of the D and the G. and then I'm just using my forearm and my wrist to cross back and forth. Louis Kievman has a great little exercise for this, and basically what I'm going to do is sustain one string. I'm going to sustain, in this case, the C string while I pivot over to the G, playing every other beat. So it'll sound something like this. I'll also do the same thing starting on the G, going back to the C. This is really going to help me master that motion of turning using my forearm and my hand at the wrist in order to pivot from one string level to the next while my upper arm is staying on the level between the strings. This is, on the one hand, really great for mastering the motion of these smaller, faster string crossings, but it's also really great for sound production because this kind of turn the doorknob motion is really a great way for getting weight into the string rather than just pressing with your first finger. Feeling that sensation of pronating your whole arm is going to get more leverage into the string with less pressing. So once you've practiced that, and you can practice that also with double stops, so with your fingers. So for example, the original exercise is written in sixths. All the way up the scale. Then I'll go back and forth just from playing my open strings quickly with the 16 notes. I like to alternate that with just playing the double stop. Trying to make sure I'm using the same amount of bow. If I hear that it's uneven, then I'll practice with rhythms. It can be really helpful if you notice that you have a particular difficulty in different parts of the bow to really just isolate that part. So for example, doing that exercise only in the lower part of the bow or only in the upper part of the bow before you go to the whole bow is going to help iron out some of those crossings that are more challenging for you. Principle number 4, when skipping over strings, move your entire arm as one unit from one string level to another. So you might ask yourself, well, when am I skipping over strings? Quite a lot, actually. So if you think about the Bach Cello Suite number 4, we're skipping from our low string to our high string over and over. Here's an example of sort of chunkier string crossings where I really need to move my arm as one unit in order to support the sound and the bow as I move from string level to string level. Now, Kievman also has another exercise to practice this for large string crossings, and it starts off with slurs. I'm just going to be playing octaves between my low string and my high string. Can practice that same version also starting on an up bow is really great. And you'll notice in order to do that successfully, I have to really quickly cross with my whole arm as a unit. He advises to make sure you're not moving the instrument as you do this, which is pretty common, and to not try and do separate parts of the arm, but to actually move the whole thing together as a unit. Makes it much more efficient. I also find that it's important to think about how the C string is going to need more weight, which means conversely the A string is going to need less. So you've got to release weight as you're crossing. So that's important to be mindful of. The other way to practice this is also just with separate bows. prefer practicing that up the whole way. And then separate bows but faster note values, so like in quarter notes. Can also practice that one starting on an up bow. Now, obviously there's a tiny gap in sound, and I'm trying to minimize that as much as possible. And the way to minimize that is to make the crossing as fast as possible. But really practicing that exercise consistently, I think you'll find that it's much easier to do these kinds of skips, which is something we don't regularly practice, except more of a lot of times in a martelet context, say like in Kreutzer. But if you think about it, when you have stop notes, you have even more time to cross levels into the other string level. And when you have to do it in legato, you have a lot less time to do it. So it's really about minimizing that time and doing it as quickly as possible, as smoothly as possible. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is combining different types of string crossings, where we have maybe ones with the arm and ones with the hand or the forearm. A great example of this is the Bach Cello Suite No. 1, the Prelude. And in this one, I've got both kinds of string crossings. I have these larger ones that are initiated by my arm right at the beginning. I'm going to feel that sensation that I'm moving all the way to the D string level. And then for these string crossings here, I want to feel on the in-between level between the D and the A. So the double stop level between D and A. And so I've got a large string crossing and small ones. If I practice that in slow motion, really being aware of which part of my arm is doing the crossing, it makes it a lot easier for me to support the sound and to play with ease when I'm going faster. Slightly different version of this kind of work happens in Bach's Cello Suite No. 3 in the famous Bariolage section towards the middle of the second page of the Prelude. Now here we're also moving across 3 strings, but the pattern's quite different because we're always returning to the lower string. So in this case, a really helpful exercise that is inspired by Dunas is to start on the D string, and I'm going to roll to the, or rock to the G string and play a double stop, and then back to the A. So in this exercise, my bow arm is really staying on the level of the D string, and then I'm using this pivoting motion of my forearm and my hand to grab the other strings without having to unnecessarily make a lot of big motions with the upper arm, which is going to be unwieldy and slow. Can do the same thing starting on the D going to the A. Both of those things are really going to help me when I go back to playing the actual passage. Whichever bowing you do. In either of those cases, I'm really feeling like my arm is on the D string and I'm moving back and forth with my forearm and my hand to catch the other strings without having to leave the security of that D string level. Thanks for watching this video on the principles of smooth string crossing. I hope your bow is moving a bit smoother than it was a few minutes ago. If you'd like a PDF of the exercises that were covered in the video, there's a link in the video description below that you can click on, and it'll take you to a place where you can download that. Also, please consider liking this video, subscribing to my channel, or sharing the video with a friend that you think could benefit from it. Thanks, and happy string crossing.